My name is David Burgess. I'm the Head of Professional Learning and Leadership at Education Scotland, and I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming you to this year's Tri-Nations event, which is called Reigniting the Purpose of Education. I'm joined on the call by colleagues from the National Academy for Educational Leadership Wales and from the leadership team in IDGA, which is the school support service in the Department of Education in Ireland. The aim of the session today is to provide an opportunity for you to connect, to join together and engage in ensure what is bound to be a wonderful session from Santiago Rincón-Gallardo, who's joining us from Toronto. It's an opportunity for colleagues across Wales, Scotland and Ireland to join together, and the focus for this is really about that purpose of education, and Santiago was the key person to talk to us about that. Before we start that, I'd just like to remind you, if you could keep your microphones on mute, and also if you keep your videos off at this point in terms of your cameras, but we will have an opportunity to engage in questions and answers with Santiago after his keynote. Santiago will provide an input, and during that you'll be able to capture questions in the Padlet. There'll be a link to the Padlet in the chat pane. And there was a QR code as well, so you can feel free to populate questions in the Padlet throughout. If you have any access issues getting onto that Padlet, just use the chat pane, but also use the chat pane if there's something that really connects with you, you want to just put some kind of comments in, please do that, because that will be great for Santiago to see that as well. After Santiago's keynote, you'll be invited to join a breakout room where you'll have about 10 minutes or so just to introduce yourself to colleagues from each country, and really have a chance to discuss things that resonated with you, challenge your thinking, and the idea would be also you could generate a question from your group to pop into the Padlet. When you return to the main room, Santiago will take on some of the questions, and we'll have a discussion around those kind of key points that have been made, and you'll be welcome to unmute and bring yourself into the conversation with Santiago. He loves engaging with colleagues from Scotland, Wales and Ireland, so he'd be very keen for you to do that. When you're in the Padlet, if you put your question in there, don't forget to add your name in there as well, so we can bring you in to the chat as well. And if you see a question like, please just click the heart, let us know that was a good question to be asked. So I'm really delighted to welcome Santiago Rincón-Gallardo to the session. In the past year, I've had the privilege of working with Santiago, and when we're thinking about who's best placed to support us with a focus on school and system leaders and the purpose of education, we knew exactly who to go to. Santiago is joining us from Toronto. He's an education consultant and chief research officer in Michael Fullan's team. He's involved in multiple projects in the US and Canada, Latin America and Europe. And through his research, he advises leaders and educators on transforming teaching and learning across entire education systems. A key theme in Santiago's work is that for change to be effective in public education, it requires deep and widespread cultural change across all of the system. And at this point in time, for us all in education in Scotland, Wales and Ireland, the purpose of education is a key discussion point. So I'm delighted we've got Santiago with us today, and I'm hoping that he's there, and I'll just be able to hand over to Santiago to take us through his keynote. Santiago, welcome.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you very much to everyone in this call. It is a pleasure to connect with you. I had the privilege of spending about a week in Scotland last year in the fall, sometime in October, for the Scottish Learning Festival, and I have to say I will not lie if I say that it felt like falling in love with a nation. I felt like I really felt like getting to connect with long lost friends, and I was very inspired by the vision that that Scottish educational system has set for itself. I was very pumped up and very inspired to see all the ways in which educators and families and school leaders and system leaders are ready for substantive change across the system. And I you know, it is. Let me put it this way. When I usually present my ideas to an audience, mostly in America, in the North America, in Canada, in the United States, the usual reaction of the people listening to what I'm saying is, oh my God, what are we doing? We're doing everything wrong. But in Scotland, when I was presenting the ideas that I have been developing over the past 25 years, the reaction was, yes, that's where we're going. That's what we want to do. And that made, for a very powerful experience for me, and something that really resonated in my heart. So my intention is to continue very connected with Scotland and its journey. I know there's a lot of struggles and a lot of uncertainty, but I intend to continue the connection with this nation in the longer run. And I'm delighted that we now have educators and leaders joining us also from Ireland and from Wales. It is a real pleasure. This is my very first time interacting with with an audience from Wales and from Ireland. And I hope the ideas that I will offer here will provoke some thinking, will shake up some of our the ideas, the work that may have been feeling a little bit stagnated now, to reimagine, to start to reimagine again what education is about and why we educate. So that's my purpose today. Reigniting our purpose is the title of my talk today, and purpose is more important than ever right now. And I'll talk a little bit about why. But let me start by quoting one of my most recent mentors, Dr. Margaret Whitley. She says, "There's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about." And this is a very important thing to do right now. As a community, as I think about, as a national community, as a global community dedicated to education, I think we need to find again what it is that we care about. There's been a lot of distraction in the work we do. There's a lot of disruption in the work we do. And there's a lot of paperwork and administrative work and a lot of things happening outside of the school that are affecting the lives of our students that can very easily distract us from what really matters to us. And what we do know from history is that it is only when groups, when communities, when organizations, when movements come back to rediscovering what they care about, that really beautiful, amazing things can happen. And I'm hoping that with this talk, we will offer some ideas as to where to start and why it's so important. So let me start with, here's my Twitter account, Reigniting Our Purpose. That's what we're going to be talking about. And for those of you who would like to have a copy of the slides, so you don't have to worry about, taking notes and taking pictures of your screen, you can find it here in this QR code. You can just take a picture of it. You can just point it with your camera and access the slide deck, the complete slide deck, again, so that you don't have to worry about taking the notes. I will present the QR code again at the end. So don't worry, don't panic if you don't have your camera with you right now. It will be presented at the end as well. But for those of you who are ready, this is where you can access the slides. So let me start this conversation with the dark part, with the difficult part. Okay, and I promise it will just be a few minutes. Okay, after that, we're gonna start building, we're looking to the light. But I wanted to start with the dark side, with the difficult part, because I think it's very important to pay attention to where we're standing. If we are serious about rediscovering our purpose, I think we need to get a sense of where we are standing as societies and as a global community as well. And Margaret Whitley summarizes it very well. We are in times of collapse. We are in times of collapse. Political collapse, social collapse, environmental collapse, financial collapse. And this affirmation is not an opinion. It is a historically validated and a scientifically validated claim. When you look at the work that historians of different civilizations over the last few thousands of years have concluded about the rise and the fall of civilizations, they have been able to identify some of the signs that a civilization, a particular civilization, is in the stage of collapse. And when you look at our current state, and look at that list, it's like a perfect description of our times. The good thing about looking at the kind of long view of history is that it does seem like, there's no civilization that has ever just stayed living forever. The rise and the development and the fall of civilizations is part of their life cycles. Civilizations live and die. So the good thing about looking at the long, process of history is that it helped us realize that we're not the only ones who have screwed up, okay? That it's happened over and over again. But we're right now in times of collapse. What are some of the signs that we're in collapse? When you look at the work of Sir John Glough, for example, who has been who studied the rise and fall of several civilizations, and after studying a few, realized that there was no point in studying anymore because he had found very stable patterns for the collapse of civilization. There will be things like internal divisiveness. There's a lot of internal fight within groups, between communities. And usually all these internal fights happen with the people fighting not realizing that the bigger enemy is at the gates. I don't know if this sounds familiar, but I think we have seen polarization, divisiveness, intolerance just grow like crazy these days. In times of collapse also, the elites, the powerful, grab everything for themselves. Okay, so you see a diminishing role of the state, for example, in providing education, healthcare, services, etc. The elites take everything for themselves. In times of collapse, religion is substituted by celebrities, right? So the idolatry, the adoration of celebrities, of rock stars, of sports stars, etc. Those are just three examples, but I think you see where you're going. I think I'm pretty much saying where we're at right now. We are in times of collapse, as I was saying. And as I said, I won't stay here too long, but I think it's very important, again, to look at where we are right now, to decide then what's a wise and appropriate way to respond to our current times. And in times of collapse, of course, there's so much uncertainty. There's so much, everything around us is falling apart, that it's very usual and also very understandable that many people will throw the towel, to say, I give up, there is nothing else to do. No matter what I do, we're already in collapse, so why bother? But I want to propose an alternative response to the time of collapse we're in right now. And this is, again, something that I learned from Margaret Wheatley. In times of collapse, there's one thing that's incredibly important for us to do, and that makes it worth our life and our best efforts. And that thing is protecting the human spirit, maintaining the human spirit alive, feeding it, helping it grow, helping it expand, etc. And this in itself, it's worth our best effort, I believe. This is where I find hope in my darkest moments. This is where I find energy and the mental capacity to stay focused in these times of trying, in these very difficult times. So to protect the human spirit, to keep the human spirit alive, that's the work that we have to do now, if we so choose. Of course, many people will choose to give up, and that's understandable. But for those who are not willing to simply give up, this is a good thing to focus on. And for me, this is a good way to filter out what I'm doing and decide whether I will continue to do it or not. Is what I'm doing helping feed, maintain alive the human spirit or not? And if not, then that's not the priority for where I'm putting my time. Is this keeping the human spirit alive? That's a good compass for me now as I decide which projects I engage in, etc. Margaret Wheatley actually invites us to think about our work as leaders as warriors for the human spirit. That is, people who do everything they can with what they have and from where they are to keep the human spirit alive. And another way to think about it is as creating, and this is another idea from Margaret Wheatley, islands of sanity. Our work is creating islands of sanity. When everything around us is falling apart, what we have to do is to create our islands of sanity. And let me just be very explicit that when I saw what Scotland is doing, and as I learned about what Wales is doing with their education, or what Ireland is aspiring to as well, I think you are in a good position to be probably the first nationwide islands of sanity in this world. And I think that's why it's so important, what the work you are doing and the work you have ahead of you is so important. Because the islands of sanity that we're seeing in many places are very small. It's a one school, one classroom, but we haven't seen nationwide systems that are actually acting as islands of sanity, spaces that are maintaining alive the human spirit. And I think that's the nature of the work that's ahead of us. Again, I'm not pushing everybody to go into this route, but I want to, of course, invite you to get into this work because it's very important. And just in case, there's a question, Margaret Whitley was talking at some point with the Dalai Lama when she was so disappointed. She dedicated her life to making the world a better place, worked with many NGOs and governments and armies and social movements and civil society, and came to the point of realizing that all these efforts had not really, given its fruits. She was very disappointed, and she was telling the Dalai Lama how disappointed she was. There's no point in doing what we're doing, what we have been doing, etc. And the Dalai Lama approached her with a big smile and told her, "Hey, you should actually keep doing what you're doing, and just know that it will have its fruits. It will bear its fruits in about 700 years, but it will bear its fruits." And I think that gives us a good dimension for where we're at right now. We may not be able to find a totally brand new world in our lifetimes, but by keeping the human spirit alive, we're maintaining the possibility that a much better world will continue later on when we're long gone. But we need to be the keepers of the fire, right? The people who protect, who keep this very tepid flame alive. And that's the nature of the work we have ahead of us. So we can see in the way that we're organizing our societies, our human interactions, we can see two divergent extremes, two ways in which the human activity is being organized, structured, set up, etc. On the one side is relationships of domination and control of certain groups over others, of states over citizens, of certain nations over other nations, of humans over nature, etc. We see a tightening of relationships of domination and control. On the opposite end, we're seeing also relationships that are based on solidarity and freedom. And everything we do right now will support one of these two directions. And I think it's very important to be very clear on which direction we want to support, which direction do we want to contribute to. And I have no doubt that the direction on the right side, solidarity and freedom, is what can keep the human spirit alive. Domination, control, even when it can come from good intentions, it dehumanizes us. Okay, it is usual, as we have children, for example, to control them, and sometimes the impulse to control is driven by care, right? We don't want our children to get hurt. We don't want them to have a much of a hard time. But the problem is that when this becomes the dominant, the pervasive way we interact with them, we dehumanize them, because we don't give them the agency, the confidence that we don't offer the trust that they can actually figure things out themselves, so they can be the builders of their own lives, etc. This was an example of the family, but it applies as well to entire societies and entire organizations. Domination and control on one side, solidarity and freedom on the other. And again, I think we need to start building more and more the tendency towards solidarity and freedom, and that's where we have to go. So a very important question that we need to ask ourselves in times like this is, why educate? Why do we educate? funny enough, I don't think it's a question that we as societies ask ourselves very often. Again, I think there are some important exceptions. When I learned about curriculum for excellence from Education Scotland, I started to see again a nation that was clear on their answer to this question. And I think that's a significant development. But overall, most people, most systems around the world are not being explicit about why are we educating our young people. And what I want to do here is to propose 4 major purposes that I believe offer a good set for what it is that we should be educating for. And these 4 purposes that I will offer here come both from my own personal experience and what I wish education will do for my children, but also for children around the world. And from looking at what different societies, civilizations over centuries have said about what education is for. And if I had to summarize it again in 4 short sentences, what I would say is that we educate so that our children, youth, and adults can know themselves, can think and learn by themselves, take care of themselves and others, and better the world. I think this offers a good initial set to think about. And I'm not here to convince you that this should actually be the purpose of education, but I am here to invite you to ask yourself this question, to respond to it as explicitly as you can, and as precisely as you can, because it's in the response to these questions that we can start to decide what we're going to prioritize, where we're going to put our efforts, where are we going to place our energy. Is what we're asking our children every day, allowing them to know themselves, to think and learn by themselves, take care of themselves and others, or better the world. And if the answer is no, then the question is, why are we doing it? Why are we asking them to do it? Okay, so again, I think this offers a good compass. Again, it's not the only compass. You may come up with a different list, but make your list and use it as your compass. To decide what's prioritized and what isn't, what's left for later, and what's the crucial work to do. Okay. So 4 major purposes that I propose here. And so here comes the bad news. When you look at this list of 4 purposes, you know, I suspect if you were to do the work of trying to answer this question, why we educate, your answers would probably not be very different from the ones I have here. I think we would have a relatively deep and robust consensus on these being important purposes for education. The bad news is that the institution that we have created to educate is not only a very imperfect technology to make any of these purposes possible. In many ways, it gets in the way of these fundamental purposes. And this is not the responsibility or something to place blame on anybody. It is the way that schooling has been historically set up and structured and organized. Schooling as we know it is not very good to foster any of these 4 purposes. And in many ways, it gets in the way. One of the core lessons that we learn in school from very early on is to be taught. We learn to be taught. What does that mean? We learn to sit quietly, to listen to what the adult in the room is saying, and to do it. Learning to be taught is fundamentally learning compliance, learning to do as you're told. And of course, don't get me wrong. This is an important thing to learn. Learning, being compliant is not a bad thing. I mean, I have 2 young children, and when I'm on my own with them, if they and when we're also with my wife here, if they were not to listen to and do what we're asking them to do most of the time, the house would be chaos. It would be chaos. Of course, it's important to understand expectations, to help our children understand expectations and to respond accordingly. Of course, it's important. But the problem is that when this is a consistent, systematic experience of our students, most of the time they are in classrooms, we're disabling them to do what we're asking, what I'm suggesting as the purposes here. We're disabling them from the opportunity to know themselves, to think and learn by themselves, to take care of themselves and others, and to better the world. Because learning to be taught and learning to learn are very different things. They're very different things. Learning to be taught implies and promotes the habit of and cultivates the habit of putting the responsibility, placing the responsibility of determining what's true, what's good, what's beautiful outside of yourself, in your authority, in your teacher, in your school leader, in your minister of education, in your president, in your religious leader. When you learn to be taught, you basically learn that the truth, beauty, and goodness is outside of you, and it's somebody else that has to tell you what is true and what's not true, what's beautiful, what's not beautiful, what's good and what's not good. Learning to learn, on the other hand, and on the contrary, is about taking responsibility to determine by yourself, based on your values and your culture and your knowledge and your experience and your expertise and your intuition, what is true and what's not true, what's beautiful and what's not beautiful, what's good and what's not good. And it's a fundamental vehicle to know yourself, to think and learn by yourself, right? It is you that has to decide based on culture, based on experiences and knowledge, etc. But it's, at the end of the day, each person that needs to decide what's true and what's not true, what's beautiful, what's good. Learning, at the end of the day, and if there's one idea I want to leave with you here today, learning is a practice of freedom. Learning is a practice of freedom. When we think about the things we know how to do very well and how we learn them, we realize that it was mostly in conditions of freedom. You know, we had what we know how to do very well that has stayed with us for our lives, for the rest of our lives, are things that we learn under conditions of freedom, with some autonomy to determine what we will learn, with whom, when, at what times, how much time we're going to dedicate to it, with etc., how we're going to learn it, etc. Learning is a practice of freedom, and it is a practice of freedom too, because learning requires that we feel safe to make fools of ourselves, that we feel safe to make mistakes, to fall, to get up again. And that's what children actually know how to do very well, mostly outside of classrooms. But that's why they learn so quickly, because they feel, in general, when they're playing, when they're at home, when they're outside in the parks, they know that they are safe to try whatever it is they want to try, to fall, to get up again, etc. Learning, and that's freedom. That's freedom. When you know that it doesn't matter if it doesn't work at first, that you will get up again and try again. And that's a fundamental condition for learning. Learning is a practice of freedom. And again, it is mostly absent as such, as a practice of freedom, mostly absent in the places where learning should be most alive, which are schools and classrooms. And again, this is not to put blame on anybody. It's not to place blame on anybody, but it's a matter of looking at what has been the historical purpose of schooling. And historically, schooling has never been an institution that seeks to promote learning as a practice of freedom. Never. I mean, there are alternative schools, there are progressive schools that may have been kind of outliers and trying to build a different way to organize schooling so that learning happens more and more as a practice of freedom. But overall, the overall institution of schooling is not designed to make learning as a practice of freedom possible. Schooling has had three fundamental historical purposes that it actually fulfills pretty well. Schooling is an institution that way more than a century, almost two, has fulfilled these three fundamental purposes: custody, control, sorting. Custody is the role that we all came to value way more during the pandemic, the role of the school as the place where you send children while the parents are working. Taking care of the children while the parents are working, what an important role. And I think, again, those of us with young children during the times of the pandemic just came to discover in a very, very sudden and unexpected way how important school as a place for custody is, what an important historical function this institution has had. The second function is control. Schooling is a vehicle for control. My very dear mentor and friend and teacher, Richard Elmore, said it in a pretty beautiful way, somewhat humorous way, but he would say, most of what we do in schools is actually driven by the fear of children getting out of control. And I think it's a pretty accurate statement. A lot of what we do is based on fear that children will get out of control. And of course, there's that fear. I mean, how many children we have in our care, and of course, we don't want them to eat us or to, or to hurt each other. I'm joking a little bit here, but a lot of the anxiety that comes from the practice of teaching is that things get out of control. And then we have created the mechanisms, the ways in which we can keep children more or less contained, more or less controlled. But that's the second main function. And the third one is sorting. Schooling has become the almost de facto place where children are assessed, measured, tested, and sorted, so that it's determined to determine who has access to what kind of opportunities. So it's not that schooling doesn't work, it's that it works very well for the purposes it was designed for. But here is the core tension that we have to navigate now. If we realize that learning is a practice of freedom on the one hand, and on the other hand, schooling is control. That's the tension, right? Learning is freedom, schooling is control. That's the fundamental tension that we need to work with, okay? It's not getting rid of schooling altogether, but just acknowledging that there's a fundamental tension there that we need to tackle and to try to move more towards learning as a practice of freedom, if we are serious about keeping the human spirit alive. And as you know, if you think about the two trends that I was talking about, schooling has been historically a vehicle for domination and control. And what I'm inviting us to think about is how can we create conditions in our classrooms, schools, and systems so that the trend, the nature of human relationships happening there are more relationships of solidarity and freedom, not so much of domination and control. And I think what you will find is that when you start giving the children more agency over their learning, over the running of the school, over the decisions that affect their lives, they are tremendous allies. Tremendous allies. As a system leader in Ontario a few years ago, about 20 years ago, when the province, when the Ontario reform, when the Ontario reform was starting, said it beautifully. He said, at the end of the day, people behave the way you treat them. So if we treat our children as competent, responsible citizens that can make good decisions, that's how they will become. That's how they will behave. Anyways, so more freedom, more solidarity as a way to enable learning as a practice of freedom. Now, of course, the question, an important question to clarify, an important concept to clarify is learning. What do we mean by learning? And here I will make reference to some of my own thinking, but also thinking of my mentor and friend, Richard Elmore. We lost him to a sudden death a few years ago. But his thinking, I think, needs to stay, and he's very well alive. And I think especially in times like this. Simon Saracen, back in the year 2000 or so, was arguing one of the points he made in actually a book that has the title that I'm presenting in this slide, and what do you mean by learning? He would argue at the time, and I think that the argument is still valid today, that learning was probably the concept most widely used in the education sector, the word that we most use as educators and as educational leaders. And yet it's probably the most undefined concept. So when you ask people what learning is, we get to a wide range of responses, many of them very narrow or too broad, too general, etc. So what I want to do here is to offer a good working definition of what learning is. Not as the ultimate one. I think there are pieces that may still be missing, but that we can articulate, taking advantage of what the neuroscience and the sciences of learning and development have discovered about the nature of learning. So what is learning? Let me start with my initial definition, and I think this captures it in an important way. But then I'll complement it with what Richard Elmore had to say. Learning at the end of the day is the process and the result of making sense of questions that matter to us. Okay, that's what learning is. It's the process and the result of making sense of questions that matter to us. But if we think about what actually happens internally as we learn we come to a definition that that Richard Elmore articulated in the last article he wrote after studying the neuroscience of learning pretty deeply and pretty comprehensively. And what Richard Elmore suggested is that learning at the end of the day was the ability to intentionally modify what we know, what we think, and what we do in response to evidence, experience, and reflection. Okay, that's Elmore's definition. I think it's a very good definition. I think it's highly rational, and that's why I wanted to include the question of questions that matter to us, because at the end of the day, we learn what we want to learn. You know, the rest of things we can pretend we're learning, but we're not really learning. It's about questions that matter to us, and that brings the emotional aspect of learning to the surface as well. But if we were to combine the definition that I'm proposing here with what Richard Elmore articulated as what learning is, we could say that learning is the process and the result of making sense of questions that matter to us by intentionally modifying what we know, what we believe, and what we do in response to evidence, experience, and reflection. Okay? And what I like about that is that in this definition, Richard also realizes and clarifies that learning is a process of constant interaction with the world, with our reality. We try to change it, we try to understand it, and in the process, we also change ourselves. Okay, but I think this is a pretty decent initial starting point. You know, a starting point for to ground the kind of work that we need to be doing in schools. To what extent are we allowing children to make sense of questions that matter to us? To what extent are we helping them learn to intentionally modify what they know, what they believe, what they do in response to evidence, experience, and reflection? Okay. And again, this definition, I think it's the definition that would live in the world of learning to learn. And again, one set of bad news is that this definition of learning as defined here, is not what we're doing with what we're cultivating with most of our children, in most of our classrooms, in most of our schools around the world. There's a very different default definition of learning under which schooling operates, and that schools cultivate. The other definition, the kind of learning that happens most of the times in most schools that we know are working right now, is this. It's the ability to recall and repeat information and algorithms in a precise and appropriate manner. The ability to recall and repeat information and algorithms in a precise and appropriate manner. A lot of what we're asking our children to do is this, to recall and repeat information and algorithms in a precise and appropriate manner. And this type of learning has always been, or the fact that schools put a lot of emphasis on this definition of learning, this default definition, has been criticized for a long time, almost as long as conventional schooling has been around, compulsory schooling has been around. John Dewey, for example, was worried, with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and getting children to recall and repeat information, do rote memorization, etc., that was not the kind of learning that was worth proposing, the same or promoting. The same with Maria Montessori later on in the 70s, Paulo Freire, Ivan Illich, all these radical thinkers of education were just trying to say, hey, this is not what we should be educating for. So, and more recently, people like Sir Ken Robinson, Kirsten Olsen, many people in these years, in this decade, have been saying this is not what we should be training our children to do. Now, as I was saying, the critique to schooling and to promoting this kind of learning that I'm articulating in the left side of the table, so that the critique to it has been around for a long time. But I want to argue that, especially starting last year, maintaining this as our main priority as schools and educational systems places humanity and the survival of humanity at risk. I know it sounds a little bit exaggerated, but let me articulate why. The ability to recall and repeat information. So last year, we saw the boom and an exponential acceleration of the development of artificial intelligence, especially with the launch of ChatGPT. And we are at a point now with the amazing development, incredible, fascinating, and terrifying at the same time development of artificial intelligence. We are now in a time where the ability to recall and repeat informational algorithms in a precise and appropriate manner is something that computers and machines can do much better than us humans, much more quickly, much more efficiently, much more reliably. So if we continue to train our children to recall and repeat informational algorithms in a precise and appropriate manner, what we're effectively doing now is to train them as second-class machines. And I don't think that's fair for them, and I don't think that's a way, and that then places us at risk of subsiding, to a much more sophisticated form of intelligence, rational intelligence that exists now, which is the artificial intelligence. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, to which version of learning will we dedicate our time and effort? I think that's the question. Which version of learning are we going to be dedicating our time and effort to? With this contrast, and knowing that artificial intelligence now we are in the first time in the history of humanity that there's an intelligence that's superior to human intelligence. Okay, a rational intelligence that's superior to human intelligence. I think the question we need to ask ourselves is, so then, if not the ability to recall and repeat informational algorithms in a precise and appropriate manner, then what? And I think the other definition that I'm offering for what learning is offers a good starting point. But let me just summarize what I believe are two of the major traits. What are two of the major traits of humanity, of humans, that we would need to cultivate way more intentionally and as our priority? What is it that as humans we can do much better than machines, and that will bring value added to the world? And again, it's no longer the ability to recall and repeat informational algorithms in a precise and appropriate manner. It's not that any longer. There are two major traits, at least two major traits in humans that I think we need to elevate and cultivate way more intentionally and with all we have. So the first one is discernment, our capacity to discern, our capacity to decide what's true and what's not true, what's beautiful and what's not beautiful, what's good and what's not good. The algorithms of artificial intelligence don't allow artificial intelligence to discern true for falseness, what's true from what's false, what's good from what's not good, what's beautiful from what's not beautiful. Okay, and that's something that we as humans have, and that we need to cultivate even more. And the second one is compassion, our capacity to connect with others, our capacity to understand the pain, the joy of others, capacity of compassion. And I think we could add a third one, which is creativity, our ability to come up with entirely new ideas, new ways to think about problems, etc. Those are the traits that we need to start cultivating way more intentionally, especially, again, if what we want is to keep the human spirit alive. And here's the fundamental unit that we need to change if we want to liberate learning, if we want to make learning, bring learning to life as a practice of freedom. It's the pedagogical core. It's the interaction between educator and learner in the presence of knowledge, or in the presence of an object of knowledge. It's in this fundamental unit that actually the energy to change our schools and educational systems resides. Actually, when you change in fundamental ways what happens here in the pedagogical core, you release energy, just like you would do when you intervene or penetrate the nucleus of an atom. That creates energy, that reverberates, that expands energy in tremendous ways. And this is the fundamental unit that we need to change. The good news is that this is a unit that's within our reach. Regardless of what's happening around us, this is within our reach. And again, this is where the reservoir of energy to renew, to renovate, to reimagine, to recreate our educational systems lies. Now, in the pedagogical core, the fundamental relationships in its conventional configuration is a set of relationships of domination and control. Again, we have knowledge over teachers, teachers over students. Actually, in the conventional configuration, the pedagogical core looks more like a line with 3 circles, one on top of the other, right? But we know that that's not how learning happens. Learning doesn't happen in relationships under the relationships of domination and control. At least good learning, the kind of learning that we're after right now. Good, powerful learning, as we could derive from the research of John Hattie, but also the philosophy and the thinking of Paulo Freire. Good, powerful learning doesn't happen in relationships of domination and control. It happens in relationships of dialogue, in more horizontal relationships where both parts influence and change each other, where both parts learn and change in the process of interacting. That's how good, powerful learning happens, but that's also how democracy happens. So the pedagogical core is where learning happens, but also where well-being happens. Let me go before democracy, well-being. In relationships of domination and control, what we cultivate is ill-being, is the sense of inadequacy, the sense that I'm not important enough, that I'm inadequate. Well-being, on the contrary, occurs when we can be in, especially our young people, they have access to adults who look them in the eye, who care for them, who learn from them and listen to them. So again, in more horizontal relationships. So in the pedagogical core, you have a fundamental unit where well-being occurs or not, and also democracy. I mean, at the end of the day, there's relationships of power in the pedagogical core, and if what we're doing is to have our children always in disadvantage in relationships of domination and control, again, when they're always below, what we cultivate, not necessarily in an intentional way, but in a very effective way, is the mindsets and the behaviors and the beliefs that sustain authoritarian regimes, dictatorships. On the contrary, democracy thrives in settings and in when the sets of relationships within authority or the state and citizens or teachers and students is one of dialogue, of mutual learning, where we are interacting on equal grounding. It doesn't mean that we are the same, but we learn from each other and change each other in the process. So here's the fundamental unit we need to change, and doing it will require, as David was saying in the introduction this morning, deep and widespread cultural change. And what we do know is that we need to change in fundamental ways how we think about and how we do our work as teachers, as education leaders, as policymakers, etc. And so what we need is deep and widespread cultural change. And the good news is that throughout history, humanity has figured out or has been able to develop and use a vehicle that's very powerful to change culture in a deep and widespread manner. And that vehicle are social movements. So throughout history, one of the most important vehicles for cultural renewal have been social movements. And my invitation in the book that you'll see here is to start thinking about and enacting educational change and practicing educational change as a social movement. That's the nature of the work we have to do. And by talking about social movements, I'm not talking about aggression and disruption, or at least not confrontation, but to start to think about what social movements do that help change culture. And in their ways of operation lie many of the clues as to how we can do this. And this idea is not just a theoretical elucubration. There are many movements of pedagogical renewal, especially in the Global South, that have managed to change in fundamental ways the pedagogical core with phenomenal results. And the people who have studied these initiatives actually say these are social movements. They operate as social movements. So again, not just a theoretical elucubration, but something that has a good empirical base in some examples that have been existing over the past 5 decades on and off across the Global South, and that I would love to chat more about at some other point. But let me just offer this quick overview. I won't go through every line in this table, but the paradigm, the image of the social movement, I think offers a good alternative paradigm for the dominant paradigm that has guided how we do and how we think our work as educators and leaders. which is scientific management. This paradigm that inspired and also emerged during the times of the Industrial Revolution, and that basically assumed that the best way to organize human activity was to break it down into small, simple, routine tasks and creating external incentives to secure adequate execution. And David, I know we're almost on time, so just know that I'll close very soon. What I want to suggest here is that we leave behind the image of the factory and instead adopt the image of the social movement as a way to think about and promote our work. Okay, and if you look at the different ways in which social movement paradigm connects to the different, to leadership and core values and practice, etc., you will see that everything we know about effective, successful education reform actually is on this list. Okay, so just as an idea, the social movement paradigm encompasses in good, powerful ways what we already know about powerful innovation, successful innovation, successful school improvement, etc. But I think it helps us crystallize it in a single image that can guide our efforts in more powerful ways. Super. So let me just finish again with this fundamental idea. We can think about the power to learn of our children and our youth as a very weak flame. It's a very weak flame right now that's that can be shut off, and that in times of hurricanes and strong winds and storms that are threatening to extinguish it. That's the nature, and that's a metaphor that I like to use. It's like a very weak flame. It's still there, but it's very, very weak. And I think our work as educators and leaders and people who care about education, our role is to create or to turn our classrooms and schools and school systems into sanctuaries that protect this very precious, sacred flame, which is the power to learn of our children. I think that's the nature of the work we have to do. I was going to talk a little bit about leadership, but I'm realizing I spoke too much, so I won't go into leadership, but I wanted to leave with a quote from Howard Zinn that I found incredibly inspiring, especially in times of trying times like this. And what Howard Zinn, this US historian, says is, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think humans should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. What I want to do here is to invite you to bring into your everyday work the human being that you know is how you wish human beings were. And that will be a fundamental, very important contribution to the work we have to do. So again, here are the slides. Thank you so much for listening. And I very much look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Santiago, thank you so much for your keynote. So much in there to unpick and unpack. What I'm going to propose then is that we're going to go into breakout rooms, and we're just going to put into breakout rooms just for 5-10 minutes, have a quick conversation just so you can connect with colleagues across the three nations, and really what resonated with you from there, what was challenging your thinking. Maybe try and capture that in the Padlet, put a question in from your group into the Padlet, and we'll pick a couple of questions up when we come back from the breakout room. So Charlotte's going to pop you into a breakout room, and we'll come back just around about just after 5 past.
Great, and thank you, and you're all very welcome back. I'm going to pose a couple of questions from what I've seen in the Padlet. I'm Anna May Rooney from Oide Leadership in Ireland, by the way. Santiago, I'll pose 2 or 3 questions if you can keep up with me, and I hope I'm not putting you under pressure by doing that. So the first question is, we don't measure what we fundamentally value. This is a question from Scotland. We need to help the Scottish Government to understand that league tables and benchmarking tools do not work, but are turning us into an accountability society. And how do we manage that? This is an interesting one. It's the educator in your pedagogical core is in there rather than learning as an interplay between knowledge and the learner. And this person is concerned that curricular reform may be taking away the agency of the class teacher.
Yeah.
And just finally, Santiago, one from Owen in Ireland, staff are afraid of children getting out of control. This is deeply ingrained in them, and it's coming from the pressure they feel. They are underappreciated as a result of all the demands placed on them. And what can we do to assist them in that? So we'll start with those three and have another 2 or 3 ready for you shortly.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. I'll try to be brief. They're phenomenal questions, and I will do my best to try to offer concise answers to the three questions. And let me start with the last one, with the pressure, the pressure, external pressure, but also the fear that children will get out of control. How do we support our teachers to navigate that tension? Let me start by saying change is hard, period. We humans are very bad at changing. If it was up to us, nothing would change. Our brains are designed to create stability and predictability, and change also can get us out of balance. And the intention, the reaction of the brain usually is try to bring back balance and certainty. Culture is another massive force for conservative force. So culture is there to create environments and lives that feel predictable. So whenever there's something that's threatening the status quo, culture will try to devour it, to eat it, to destroy it. Okay, so both our brains internally and outside of us, culture, are very good deterrents for change. Okay, if teachers are, or you yourself are feeling resistance to change or fear for change, then all that says is that you are working the way a human is supposed to work. Okay, your brain is working properly and culture is there and doing its work. So how do we help navigate change? Nikolai Machiavelli said it beautifully in his, first essay on the state, The Prince. And what he said is, it's usually, one of the things he said is, it's usually easier for those who oppose change to organize against it than it is for those who could probably support it to organize for it. And that is the case because for those who oppose it, it is very clear what they're set out to lose. Okay, what you may lose is very clear to you. And for those who could support the change, the benefit of it is very vague, it's very flurry, very nebulous. So part of our work as leaders is to try to deflect the fear, to reduce, to mitigate the fear of what you may be losing, but at the same time bring to the experience of teachers the benefits of the change that you're proposing. So there are 3 ways in which you will not change human behavior. We know it very well. It's very well documented. 3 ways that won't work. The first one is mandate. Just do it because I say so. Michael Fullan put it beautifully. If you want to kill a good idea, mandate it. Make it mandatory, right? So it's not about mandates. It's also not about just exhortation. It's just not about, yes, we can, let's do it, I believe in you. That by itself doesn't change behavior. And the third one that doesn't work is explanation. Just showing our teachers the best evidence, academic evidence that shows what kind of practices have statistically significant effects on student outcomes. That doesn't work. Mandates, exhortation, explanation, or encouragement instead of exhortation and explanation are not enough to change behavior. What we need to do is to develop, to create, to curate, to facilitate experiences that allow teachers, school leaders, to see what is possible when you change the nature of what happens in the pedagogical core. That can be visits to other schools that are doing really amazing stuff. That can be visiting, organizing interclassroom visits, especially to classrooms where learning is well and alive, getting teachers to interact with other colleagues that are doing really good, powerful work with similar students, but having much better results. It can be about setting up professional learning opportunities where teachers experience. They don't only learn about, but they experience a different form of pedagogical relationship as learners first. Those kind of experiences are incredibly powerful, and they don't require the mandate or the encouragement or explanation. It's about lived experience. Just create experiences where teachers, school leaders, parents see the sparkle in the eyes of children when they're learning in a powerful way. And when that happens, magic happens. Okay, that's one. Another one, but this is a bit more risky, so I said it with some reservation. But another kind of experiences that you can create to prompt powerful change is experiences that make the status quo intolerable. Experiences that make the status quo intolerable. There's a school in Chile that I worked with for some time, and that had a phenomenal transformation over a period of only 6 months. In 6 months, they had moved from being the worst performing school in the region to the best performing school in only 6 months. And what it took, they had been trying for 2 years to change what was happening in the pedagogical core, and nothing had happened at the level of teacher practice. So what they did was to distribute a survey to students, asking them to rate from never to sometimes to always certain questions, certain affirmations. I feel smart when I'm in the classroom. The teacher knows me. The teacher knows, realizes when I'm not understanding something and finds other ways to help me understand. Those kind of statements, about 12 items in the survey. This is for students in elementary school. When the results came back, the teachers realized that over 85% of the students said that they never felt smart when they were in a classroom. 85%. Almost 9 out of every 10 students were saying, I don't feel smart. I never feel smart when I'm in a classroom. And that's what shook up the team. That's what helped them see the gap between what they thought they were doing and what the students were actually saying. And that's where they set the line and said, we cannot keep doing this. We cannot live peacefully, with peace of mind, knowing that 9 out of every 10 students here are saying they don't feel smart when they're in the classroom. And that's what propelled them to change what they were doing in an incredibly fast way. So experiences that make the status quo intolerable. Now, that kind of tactic is more risky. It's riskier. So my recommendation is, if you want to go that way, do it only if there's already enough trust within your team so that they can see these kind of experiences without shutting down, because it can bring in a lot of emotion, and people may shut down instead of opening to change. So trust is fundamental, very, very important. Okay, so these kind of experiences of making the status quo intolerable can backfire if you don't have an environment of very robust trust already. With regards to the test changes in reform, some reform efforts removing agency of class teachers, I think that's a real risk. I think many are selling us the marvels of artificial intelligence as a way to create these machine mentors that will support our students, but I don't think that will go too far. Over and over again, when children are set to choose whether they go with a real teacher or with a machine, they will go with the teacher every time. One element that artificial intelligence doesn't have is human connection. And that's where learning happens. You learn in connection with others. Over and over again, when I hear students saying, they're putting a computer to flick and to respond, that's boring. It is dehumanizing. It doesn't work. So even those attempts, if those are put into place, I don't think they will last too long. Now, that being said, there is a very important role that teachers, we need to rethink the role of the teacher, and the role of the so teachers will be crucial, but in a different way to how they've been now. If our role as teachers is as conveyors of information, as the people who teach others what we know, then computers will substitute us, because computers can do that much better than us. So the role of the teacher has to change from the one who knows and the one who teaches to the one who learns. Okay, just become a person, someone who models what that thing we call learning looks like. Learn in public, make mistakes and learn from them and correct them in public, so that students can see what the practice of learning looks like. That has been one of the major blind spots of our education systems. Teachers teach, they don't learn. And with that, we deprive our students of the opportunity of seeing adults, competent learners, learning just the same way as if you wanted to play soccer, learn how to play soccer, you would go to a soccer field to see soccer players playing. Or if you want to learn to make furniture, you go to a wood shop to see the carpenters doing their work, or to learn to cook, or to learn to do scientific inquiry, whatever. You need exposure to the expert practice that you want to learn. And in schools, we don't do that very well. We're not letting children see us learn. And that's one of the most important things we can do. And with regards to the changes in accountability, yes, we're not measuring what matters. That's a big problem. I think, things like, I'm more familiar with Scotland right now, but things like what Dr. Lewis Hayward did with reimagining, rethinking how we can start capturing in more accurate and credible ways what we value. There's already some really good progress going on there. The things are a bit stalled with regards to the recommendation she presented, but overall, there's already some really good thinking around that. Now, what I would invite you to do is don't wait till measures change to start changing your practice, because waiting for the top to have its act together is a path to frustration and to hopelessness. So don't wait for the top to have its act together. Instead of waiting for the new measures to come in, create the powerful changes that you can create at the pedagogical core, make your work visible, invite your leaders and find allies in the system that see how your students are coming back to life, and use that as your leverage to start softening the requirements, administrative, bureaucratic requirements that you're asked to comply with. And in the meantime, if possible, and if it is possible, and if you already have really powerful work going on with your students, start to develop with your colleagues good measures, things that actually capture this, and bring them to the attention of policymakers. Okay, so not to wait till policymakers have their act together. They won't. The machinery of schooling is just too heavy. Sometimes even well-intentioned politicians won't be able to change much, but there's a lot in your power that you can start changing now. And that will become very valuable as we go, because we're all tackling the question of how do we create new measures. And if you start doing that in your practice with your colleagues, that will be a phenomenal contribution.
Santiago, we could listen to you all day, but unfortunately we've come to the end of the time. It's very interesting you speak about, the most important thing is teachers learning to learn rather than learning to teach. And the rest of the questions are around that focus. Things like, have we forgotten to be creative, or have we not been allowed to be creative? You've answered it already by saying we need to learn. And also, the whole concept around the focus on exams, particularly for our second level colleagues. And this one, and I guess if you just said one word on this before we finish up and before I hand over to Tegwin, and this one is implications for the training of teachers, and just your a very quick thought on that for 1 minute, please, Santiago, and then I'll hand over to Tegwin to close up. Thank you, and sorry for rushing.
No, thank you very much, Anna May. In terms of the focus on exams, just know that over and over again, what we see is that when teachers focus on changing the pedagogical core in fundamental ways, exam results end up taking care of themselves, okay? So at the beginning, you may see an initial dip, but by cultivating children's ability to learn by themselves, they will do well in tests. So don't worry about that. I mean, again, maybe an initial dip, but it will be taken care of. With the implications for, and then push and organize so that the evaluation system changes, so that it actually measures what it matters. So start doing and organizing to change to change what's getting in the way of powerful learning. And implication for teachers, what we need is expert learners, people who know how to learn in powerful ways, and that changes everything. I think about teacher training, we still can look at theories, etc., but in the service of teachers becoming really good at learning, and that craft being what they pass on to students through who they are, not what they know, but who they are in the world, as curious, as learning all the time.
Thank you so much, and especially for summarising so quickly. We really appreciate it. Over to you, Tegwin.
Thank you, Anna May. Thank you so much, Santiago. So many things for us to reflect on. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to say, for me, when you talked about the capacity to be compassionate and the capacity to be creative are two things that really resonate with me here in Wales around all the things that are happening, but we must maintain that as a focus. And my second thing, as a way of saying thank you, whilst you've been delivering your presentation, I've been busy putting some phrases and words into AI and asked AI to produce a poem. So here it goes. I don't know whether it's going to be perfect, but it's a first draft. You said be creative and you talked about AI as well.
Let's do it.
So, in the heart of Santiago, a flame ignites, reigniting our purpose, setting our sights. Amidst the chaos, islands of sanity, where communities thrive in shared humanity. There is no power for change, it's clear to see, than what a caring community can decree. Keep doing what you're doing, in time it shall sprout. Be the keepers of the pyre, banishing doubt. Domination, control versus freedom song. Solidarity whispers where we belong. We educate to empower, to set minds free, so children, youth and adults can truly see. Make your list, let it guide your way. Be the compass in life, let it have its say. Learning to be taught or learn to soar. Choose wisely, for knowledge opens the door.
Wow.
Learning is freedom, a practice divine, empowering children, making spirit shine. Let them lead, let them thrive, let them yearn. For their learning, the world will turn. Learning to be taught, a structured guide, where knowledge flows from teacher to side. But learning to learn, yes, that's the key, to unlock the mind and set it free. So let's keep the flame burning for our children's learning. Thank you, Santiago. Let wisdom unfurl as we dedicate our time to the learning world. On behalf of EJA in Ireland, Education Scotland and the National Academy for Educational Leadership here in Wales, our greatest thanks to you for your time, and hopefully some of those words and phrases resonated with you that I was able to capture and use AI to deliver a poem to say thank you on behalf of us all today.